welcome back. When is your test? When have you booked your test? Okay. Is it the first time for you? Oh, first time. Okay. Where are you from? Fiji. Nice. Okay. All right. All the best of luck for that. Are you doing it at Henderson or the city? Henderson. Okay. And what score are you hoping to get? What score do you think you might get? Okay. All right. General training. Yep. Okay. All right, Avni. Well, these phrases that we're going to look at today for speaking are useful. And of course, the speaking test is the same for general training and academics. So which we're doing these. So do you know about the speaking test and the 3 parts? Do you know that there are 3 parts to speaking? Okay. All right, great. Okay, so when the examiner asks you a question about yourself, which is usually in part 1 only, not part 3. Part 3 is more general about other people. But in part 1, you will get asked a lot of personal questions, which you can start with these phrases to answer. Okay, so when you're talking about a personal experience that you had, if you have enough time to talk about a personal experience, remember part 1 is that there's quite a few questions coming at you, one like that. So you don't have a lot of time to answer each question. But if you do want to elaborate a bit more on an answer, then you can use these phrases. So I remember when, or in my experience, or what happened was, or one time, or back when I was. So this is all to do with your experiences in the past. Okay. Now, obviously this, I've put part 1 here, but you can also use this for part 2. Because in part 2, it is all about self as well. All right, so part 2 is about self. Therefore, you can use these expressions to refer back to something that happened to you in the past. Okay, now expressing personal opinion. This can be used in part 1 and part 3. Generally, in part 1, you are speaking about yourself more, but that's not to say that you can't use these phrases as well. But certainly for part 3, you know, you would be wanting to say things like, for giving an opinion, right, in part 3, you can say things like, in my view. Just going to change that color. As far as I'm concerned is also another really good one. As far as I'm concerned, it just means in my opinion. So you don't need to learn all of them, but a couple of these would be good for expressing your opinion. In part 3 of the speaking, the examiner might ask you, you know, what do you think about a certain view or topic? And that's when you can use these phrases. Is that clear? Okay. All right. Now, if you feel very strongly about the topic in question or the question that she or he is asking you, you can use a bit stronger language. So you can say, I'm sure that, for example, I'm sure that COVID-19 is going to change the world economy, for example, or I'm convinced that, which is exactly the same as I'm certain that, and there's no way, and that would be followed by the pronoun that. There's no way that. Okay, so does that make sense for your opinion? This is quite mild. Okay, but if you want to be a bit more assertive about your opinion, you can say I'm convinced that, which is stronger. Does that make sense? Stronger? Okay. All right. Now, this part refers to when you are speculating, and that means that you want to give a good response, but you might not have any experience or strong view on the topic. Okay, let's say you're given a topic which you don't really know too much about, or you don't have an opinion about. You can use what's called speculative language, and here are the examples. I suppose, it's possible, or I would imagine that, or I would say, I'd say, or perhaps. Yeah. Okay, so if you're given a topic or a question in part 3 about whether you think the retirement age should be increased to 70, if you don't really feel strongly about that topic, if you don't have an opinion about that topic, then you could use something like I would say, or I suppose. And it just gives the examiner that sense that you're not, you don't feel strongly, you don't feel weakly, but you're just, in the middle. Does that make sense? Yeah. So are there any topics, Avneil, that you feel you're not well prepared for when it comes to speaking? Is there any topic that you think you need more practice with? You mean just the news in general? Yeah. Okay. So I mean, generally what happens in the IELTS test is that you don't get given topics about current affairs, because current affairs are always changing. The news is always changing. They do not expect you to know the latest news, which is good, because for me, I don't often read the newspaper. So are you able to talk about general topics like, this might be one that you might know about. Do you know about climate change? Okay, well, that's good. Do you know about globalization? Do you know the meaning of that? Okay, well, globalization comes from the word globe or global, which means that products and brands and ideas and cultures are becoming universal around the world. So like if you imagine a brand like McDonald's, McDonald's has become globalized because it's now in probably over 100 countries in the world. And so the development of globalization really happened when the internet started to become popular, because there were so many ways that people could share information from culture to culture and country to country. And so now it's like the whole world has become one place where people feel that they are global citizens rather than, citizens of their own country. Does that make sense? We talk about global brands such as Nike or Adidas, brands like that, which are everywhere around the world now. So, I think these sorts of topics have been talked about now for more than let's say 2 or 3 years. And so most people know about these topics that I'm talking about. But if you were to ask me, what's happening in Fiji at the moment, I wouldn't know. And the examiner wouldn't ask you any questions like that about what's happening in different parts of the world? No. So when I asked you before about what topics you feel maybe you need a bit more practice with, you know, are you familiar with language to do with technology? A little bit. Yeah. Okay. So if you have a look on the website, any website that gives you IELTS topics, there's a list of topics that they use, but they do change them frequently. So, but basically, if you're not sure about technology, then you can search up vocab for technology, IELTS, speaking and writing, and that would give you, oh, sorry, I can't spell very well, I can't type very well, and that would give you some websites or, you know, some databases where you can get the right vocabulary. Does that make sense? So the internet is a wealth of information now. There's so much available on the internet for IELTS. Okay. All right, let's move on. Okay, so we're talking about speculating, which is when you don't know too much about the topic and you just sort of want to say something, but your opinion isn't too strong. You can also say, I think it's likely or unlikely is another one. Now, another thing that we need to know how to do is to ask the examiner for clarification. So clarification means that you want to make sure you understand the question that he or she is giving you. And that's perfectly fine to ask the examiner what they mean. So there's a number of ways that we can do this, and let's just go through them. So sorry, I didn't get the question is one. Sorry, I'm afraid I didn't catch that. So that's if you just didn't hear it. Could you please repeat the question? Could you repeat the question, please? Or could you say that again? So it's perfectly normal, even in everyday conversation, for people not to hear each other all the time. So don't hesitate. If you didn't hear the question, ask again for clarification. Okay, it's better to do that than answer the question on a different topic. Does that make sense? All right, so in part 3, so this is part 3, is the conversation with the examiner that lasts for about 4 to 5 minutes. You can also ask the examiner to rephrase a question, which means that they don't repeat the question the same way, but they rephrase it using other words. And so that you might be able to say, could you explain what you mean by, okay? Or could you explain the question, please? Or could you rephrase that is a good way. Say that they use a word in the question that you don't know, and it means that you don't understand the question, then you can ask them to rephrase the question using maybe more simple language. Okay, so just similar to that, we're looking at language to help us understand the question again. So if you're not sure what the examiner is talking about, you want to double check that you have the right meaning. You can say, do you mean? Or you can say, sorry, I didn't catch the last word of the question. Or you can even ask them, can I ask about a word in the question? Okay, so there is one difference between speaking and writing, and that is in writing, if you go off topic in writing, this is bad. Don't go off topic, but in speaking, it's not such a problem, okay? Because a lot of the time that you are speaking, you will understand the topic, but if you just talk about something that's similar to the topic you've been given or the question you've been given, it doesn't mean that your score will go down. Okay, whereas in the writing section, if you don't write about the topic, your score will definitely be affected. Does that make sense? Okay, so what about when you are pausing in your speaking test and you need to have time to think? This is okay to pause while you think about what you're going to say next, but you can let the examiner know that by saying things like, let me think, or let me see, or that's a difficult question. Sometimes it's quite nice to say things like, that's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. And that gives you a little bit of time, thinking time, just to get your thoughts together. Some people like to say, I've never really thought about that before. The one thing that you shouldn't say is, I don't know. You shouldn't say, I don't know, or I don't know anything about that topic. Always try and answer the question. Always try and answer the question, okay? Even if what you're talking about is not exactly the same as the topic. Does that make sense? Never say, I don't know, or I don't know anything about that topic, or can you give me another topic? No, the examiner's not going to give you another topic. Okay, so what about when you're sounding unsure? You're sounding unsure of, of what you're going to answer, or you're not sure, you need a bit more time to think. So you can say things like, I don't remember very well, but, or the first thing that comes to mind is, or I don't know a lot about this, but I guess. So you can say that you're not sure or you don't remember. That's perfectly normal. But just let the examiner know that you're still going to try and answer the question. Another one is, I'm no expert on this, but I would imagine. So that language of would, I would imagine, is quite useful. The second conditional, I would imagine. Any questions at the moment, Neil? Okay, I'm pretty sure that you know how to give examples, right? So we don't need to spend too much time there. For example, for instance, an example of this. That's probably the easiest thing to do, is to give examples. Make sure that you do give examples in the speaking. Do you know the reason for that? Okay, well, it helps us to keep talking. And it helps us to develop ideas. Okay, so if you give examples and explanations, then it means that you are speaking more and using more language. Okay, now this is a really important phrase now that I'm going to talk to you about, because in part three, it's very general, okay, and it's general about other people, not you. Okay, so remember, part one, part two is about you and your experiences, but part three is more about other people, other groups, other communities, people in your culture. All right, so that's why it's important that you are able to talk about other people and not just yourself. So most people my age think that. So other ways of talking about people might just be simply saying some people, or if you're sort of talking about groups and societies, the groups and societies, you can say the youth, or the elderly, or the middle-aged. And that way you're sort of referring to groups of people rather than individuals. Does that make sense? The rich, the poor, things like that. Yeah. Or people my age, my peers would be people my age. My peers or my colleagues. So it's basically talking about other people. Now this one is not so common, I guess. When you come to the end of a question, some people say, does that answer your question? But I haven't really heard that before. So you're welcome to use these if the occasion happens and you need to just check with the examiner if you have answered the question. But normally the examiner moves quite quickly through the questions and doesn't spend a lot of time on each question, especially in part one. Okay, so part two, which is the long turn, which is about 1 to 2 minutes, you can be given your topic and then you can say, I'd like to talk about, or I'm going to speak about, or just something like that to introduce what you're going to be talking about. Another one is open the box. You have given me the topic of and so now I would like to talk about. Does that make sense? Okay. Now when it comes to rounding up and then finishing off what you're saying, then some people like to say that's all I can think of to say on the topic. Usually it's not necessary to say that at the end, because the examiner just keeps asking you questions, and if the examiner sees that maybe you're pausing or have finished talking, they will just ask you another question rather than wait for you to say something like that. Okay, so now I think we're going to have a look at a very good response to part two, a candidate who got a high score. And at the end of it, I just want to show you the scores that I think that they would have been given for grammar and vocabulary. Obviously, I can't give them a score for pronunciation or fluency because I'm not listening to them, but we can definitely look at the language. Would you like to do that together? Okay, so the topic here is describe a journey. Describe a journey. I'm sure there were more details to this, but it's to describe a journey. And the candidate starts off by saying, I'd like to talk about a journey that I took when I was a little kid. Together with my family, I went to the Grand Canyon, which is a popular tourist attraction. It's a national park in the United States, and I know we traveled by car. I can't remember how long the trip was, but I'd guess it was about a week. So here's language to show that they weren't quite sure, so they're just using the second conditional. I would guess it was about a week. And the reason we went on this trip, well, it was probably because my parents wanted to take me for a nice trip, a nice family trip. That's a common thing to do with some families, but the reason I remember this journey so well is not because the Grand Canyon was amazing. I'm sure it was, but there was something else that happened while I was on this journey. And that was on the trip, on our way to the Grand Canyon, we stopped by a bookstore. And, I liked reading books a little bit when I was a kid. So I think my mum recommended this particular book to me. And I don't remember what it was right now, but we bought the book because she said, oh, this is a good idea. You might want to read this book. And so she gave it to me, and in the car, probably for about 4 hours or 5 hours, instead of looking out at all the scenery and at all of these new places we were driving to, I just had my head in the book. I don't think I looked up at all, and I just read the book from cover to cover for like 4 or 5 hours, just sitting in the car in the back seat instead of looking at whatever beautiful nature they wanted me to look at. I know they gave me a little bit of a hard time about it, but hey, you know, it was a memorable journey for sure, because even to this day, I still remember reading that book in the car and really enjoying it and having a really good time with it. So yeah, that's my story. Okay, so hello, Sama, how are you today? Can you hear me? All right, so the scores that I have, that I think this candidate would have received were about an 8 for grammar and an 8 for vocabulary. And the reason for grammar is because, you know, there aren't any errors. There's no errors in the grammar. However, the range of structures is not quite 9, because at the end they do repeat a little bit. They say here, I still remember reading that book in the car and really enjoying it and having a really good time with it. So this kind of sentence is just a little bit, I don't know, what would we call it? I'm going to take that. A little bit repetitive. With a band 9, to get a band 9 for grammar, you really need to have lots of variety with your structures, or your grammar structures. So this candidate, although they didn't have any errors, their range probably wasn't quite at a 9. When it comes to vocabulary, the 8 is a pretty good score. However, it's not a 9 because it's the same thing again. The range wasn't as, range of vocabulary. They had some pretty good words, so I've put them in red. But we can also look at some other words, and you can tell me whether you think it's a good word to use, and if it's kind of an advanced word in English language. So in this first page here, can you see any good words or collocations? So those 3 words go together, which is a nice collocation. Oh, can't spell that, collocation. So that means that those words go nicely together. They go well together. Popular, tourist, attraction. Okay, let's move to the next. Can you see any good words there? Any good words, or nothing too fancy? All right, you know, you're looking at very everyday language. Remember, reason, trip, parents, nothing too fancy, nothing sophisticated. Okay, how about the next page? Anything there? Any good words? or they're just very sort of simple words?
One of our candidates says she cannot listen.
Avnil. Oh, Sama.
No, Neela.
Oh, I haven't got her here. What's her name?
Neela.
Neela. Oh, she was with the reading.
Oh.
And now she's not here.
She's saying she's cannot hear. Okay, no worries.
Oh. Well, we're recording it. Okay. So, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, so any words here? Sama or Avnil? Any good words? No. They're all very simple words. Okay, so we'll keep going. What about now? Okay, well, in the red, we've got recommended this particular book to me. That's not too bad, but the rest of the words here, yeah, scenery, yep, scenery's okay. Yes, definitely. What about now? Do you know the meaning of cover to cover, from cover to cover? Any idea? Not sure. So if you think about a book, right? Just gonna take a book here, even though it's not a hardback book, but imagine that you've got a book, right? And this is the cover, and that's also the cover, but it's the back cover. So when you read a book from cover to cover, it means that you read the entire book in one go. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's an expression. Now, the reason why expressions are very good or also known as idioms, they're really good to use in your IELTS speaking because it can bump your score up from a 6 to a 7, all right, if you use some expressions. So he's used one here, cover to cover, and then she or he has used one here, a bit of a hard time about it, to give someone a hard time about something. It means to tease someone. Do you know the meaning of tease? Yep. Okay. When you give someone a hard time about something, it means that you kind of make a big deal about it and talk about it and joke about it with them. So in this case, the person was reading their book the whole time, and the parents wanted him or her to look out the window at nature, and he or she didn't want to. They were reading their book the whole time. Okay, so we've just got one more word in here, back seat. That's referring to the back seat of the car. And then lastly, anything there? Memorable journey? Yeah. Okay, memorable journey. Right. Okay, yep, that's a nice collocation. So once again, that's a collocation. Collocation means two or three words go together. So memorable and journey. All right, so when I look at this, I think to myself, they're probably, based on this part 2, they're probably around about an 8 or a 7 for vocabulary, maybe even a 7, But for the grammar, because there are a few errors, it's error. There are no errors, right, in terms of their grammar. It's perfect grammar, but there just isn't a lot of range. Okay, so I'm going to change. So just changing my mark from 8 to 7. It's more like a 7 for that part because there wasn't a huge range. Does that make sense? However, they did have some expressions, but their language was, you know, fairly, you know, basic language. So the topic was describe a journey. What sort of language or words can you think of which would go well with this topic for journey? To have an adventure. Yeah, I like that. That's good, to have an adventure. What else? What other words or verbs are related to the topic of having a trip somewhere? If you think about a trip that you have had, I don't know, in the last year or something, a journey. Did you go somewhere special? Can you describe it to me using some words? We had a road trip, is a good expression. Anything from you, Sama? What words can you think of for talking about a journey? Just any words at all that you think would be good. Yep, had a trip to the Snow Mountain. Oh, in New Zealand, was it? Okay, can you tell me some words about that trip up the mountain? What words could you describe the mountain? Good. First time I'd seen snow, so it was beautiful. So they were snow-capped mountains. And what about the activities that you did on the mountain when you went? Did you do anything fun like skiing? What did you do? What did you do at the mountain? Okay, well, there's a good word, gondola. Okay, and so what sort of experience did you have on the gondola? So you would have there would have been an amazing view. The scenery was spectacular, right? And who did you go with? Okay. All right. Well, I guess I hope that you can understand some of the criteria that is used to give the candidate the score of 8 and 7. So we'd leave it as an 8 for grammar and a 7 for vocabulary. So now we can have a bit of time. We've got 20 minutes left. We can just talk about general stuff for the speaking test. Or we can go over some of these phrases again if you've got any questions. So do you have some questions now, Sama or Avneil? Oh, no questions. Are you sure? How about you, Sama? I don't think Sama can hear me. Okay, Avneil, do you have any questions about reading or listening or writing? Because we still have another 20 minutes. Let me think. All right, well, if you're thinking, I'm going to just ask you a couple of questions that you might expect to get in part 3. Do you think that money makes people happy? I know I can't hear you when you're speaking, but maybe you could type your answer in the box. Okay, are you still there? Okay. You're certain? Okay. Certain that money makes everybody happy. All right. So you have a strong opinion about that, do you? Can you use one of these expressions? Why do you think that's important? Money. Why does money make people happy? Yeah. I'm not convinced that money can bring total happiness to people. I'm not convinced. What other things can make us happy? Other things can make us happy, such as what? Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I agree with you there. So, I mean, I'm going to speculate now, okay? I'm going to speculate that there would be some people who would think that money brings complete happiness. So if I'm not, I know that money doesn't bring me complete happiness, but I would imagine that there would be some people who think that money is everything. Yeah. So why do you think people place so much importance on making money? Like in terms of working hard to make money. Why do people want to work so hard? Hmm. Good. I suppose that's true. I suppose it's just competition with others, or they have an aim in life. Yeah, that's right. They have some sort of ambition or motivation. Yeah. So, how about you, Avnil? Do you work or are you a student? Okay. What sort of cuisine do you? What sort of food do you cook? What's the cuisine? Indian? Uh huh. Okay. Right. International. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. What's your favorite food to cook? What's your speciality? Speciality. What do you think is your best dish? What is polenta? I've heard of it. Oh, good. I would say, that's nice. I would say roast lamb rack with pea puree, creamy polenta, but I've heard of creamy polenta from the food shows. So can you tell me what polenta is? Does it try to explain it? Polenta. Is it a vegetable? It's making me hungry anyway. Okay, all right, nice. Okay, well, you might be getting a bit tired doing all the typing, Evney. It would be great if we could actually, if I could hear you, but I can't. So do you have any other questions regarding anything in the IELTS test? Anything at all? Okay. All right. Well, it's 10 to 5 now, so we can finish if you like. And yeah, good luck for the test on the 24th of May, 24th of April. I might see you, I might not see you. I hope it all goes well for you. Okay then. Thanks for joining tonight. Okay, thank you. Take care.